The world feels like it's flipped upside down. The people who speak the most often say the least. The loudest voices, the boldest headlines, the ones who trend and rise and dominate, they're not the smartest, they're not the wisest, and they're definitely not the most thoughtful. In fact, more often than not, they're the dumbest, and somehow, they're the ones in charge. We're not just living through political chaos, culture wars, or social dysfunction. We're living in a time where stupidity is power, where ignorance isn't just tolerated and it's celebrated, where critical thought is drowned out by catchy slogans, mindless outrage, and the blind noise of people who haven't paused to think in years. This is more than frustrating. It's terrifying, because deep down, we all feel it. Something is very, very wrong. The people who lie with confidence are rewarded. The people who tell the truth with doubt are ignored. The intelligent are dismissed as elitist. The reckless are called bold. The fool is praised for speaking his mind. The thinker is silenced for asking questions. How did we get here? And more importantly, why does this keep happening? What if I told you this isn't new? What if I told you that this moment, the rise of stupidity, the fall of reason, the way empty minds have taken over the microphone, was predicted decades ago? In 1943, while locked inside a Nazi prison, a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer put pen to paper and described the very crisis we're living through right now. He called it the theory of stupidity, not evil, not ignorance, stupidity. He believed stupidity was not just a passive absence of intelligence, but a dangerous force that spreads, multiplies, and becomes a weapon wielded by those in power, a tool to control the many, a shield to protect lies. A system where truth no longer matters because thinking itself has stopped. And here's the part that should haunt you. Bonhoeffer didn't think stupidity could be fixed with education. He didn't believe you could argue someone out of it. He didn't even think it was always their fault. He believed that stupidity becomes infectious when people surrender their minds to the crowd, when they stop thinking for themselves, when they hand over their conscience for the illusion of safety, identity, or belonging. And once that happens, they become part of something much worse. They don't just become dumb, they become dangerous. They become defenders of the lie, not because they understand it, but because they can't imagine anything else. So if you've ever felt like you were talking to a wall, if you've ever tried to explain something real, only to be shouted down by someone proudly repeating what they saw on TikTok, cable news, or Reddit, if you've ever watched someone speak with so much confidence while being completely wrong, you already know exactly what Bonhoeffer was trying to warn us about. And yet here we are, 80 years later. We didn't listen, we didn't learn, and now we're drowning in it. But maybe you're one of the few who's still awake. Maybe you've been watching this unfold and wondering, is it just me? Am I crazy? Or has the world actually lost its mind? If so, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're just seeing something most people refuse to admit. Stupidity has taken over. And it's not going to stop on its own. Which brings me to this. If you're someone who still values intelligence, self-awareness, and clarity in a world choking on noise, don't scroll. Don't forget, subscribe. Not just for me, for you. For the few people still left who haven't given up on their own thoughts. And if you won't, if you've already decided that this isn't worth your time, that you're too busy, too numb, or too cynical to care anymore, then do this instead. Go to the comments and tell us why. Explain why you won't subscribe to something that actually speaks the truth. We'll wait. Because if you're still watching this far in, you're not here by accident, you feel it too. The silence of the thinkers, the rise of the fools, and the distant voice of a man in a Nazi prison cell, whispering a warning we were never supposed to forget. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Not a politician, not a general, not a revolutionary with a rifle in his hands. He was a philosopher, a theologian, a man of thought, faith, and moral clarity, living through one of the darkest chapters in human history. And unlike most people at the time, he didn't look away. While others stayed quiet, Bonhoeffer chose resistance. He stood up, not just with words, but with action. He joined the secret movement to assassinate Hitler. He risked everything to smuggle Jews out of Germany, and for that, the Nazis locked him in a cell. He was arrested in 1943, imprisoned in Tegel military prison, and later sent to a concentration camp. he would never walk free again. But while behind bars, he kept writing. And it was inside that prison, surrounded by war propaganda, blind obedience, and mass delusion, that Bonhoeffer had a realization so clear, so brutal, it still echoes louder today than it ever did then. He called it his theory of stupidity. But to understand the weight of that phrase, you have to understand what this man had seen. He watched his country fall under the spell of a madman. He watched educated people, professors, doctors, pastors, turn into obedient parrots for the Nazi regime. He watched entire crowds cheer for lies, chant slogans they didn't understand, and follow leaders they had never questioned. He watched a generation stop thinking, and from inside that prison, Bonhoeffer began to write something most people were too afraid to say. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. Not evil, not hate, not cruelty. Stupidity, why? Because at least with evil, you know what you're dealing with. Evil can be reasoned with. Evil has a motive, a goal, a logic, twisted, sure, but understandable. But stupidity, you can't argue with it. You can't reason with it. You can't reach it with facts or logic or morality, because the person you're talking to isn't even there. They've given up their mind. They've handed it over to a movement, to a mob, to a leader, to whatever makes them feel safe, certain, and right, even if they're dead wrong. Bonhoeffer saw this happen to millions of people all around him, and it shook him to the core. He realized that stupidity wasn't just ignorance. It wasn't about education level or intelligence. It was something deeper, something darker. He wrote that stupidity is not an intellectual defect, but a moral one. It happens when a person chooses to stop thinking critically, in exchange for belonging, approval, or convenience. They become mentally passive, and when that happens, they stop being individuals. They become instruments. Instruments that can be used by those in power, easily manipulated, easily mobilized, easily controlled. And the terrifying part, they think they're free. Bonhoeffer wasn't writing this as some detached academic. He was living it, watching it unfold in real time, watching people abandon their conscience and cling to simple slogans, watching them laugh off atrocities, watching them become mouthpieces for a machine they didn't understand, but fully supported. And the more he watched, the more he understood. This kind of stupidity isn't neutral, it's violent, it's contagious. And it serves evil even better than evil serves itself. He wrote, "Against stupidity we are defenseless." Let that sink in. Defenseless. You can't convince it, you can't educate it, you can't shame it. Because stupidity isn't just a lack of information, it's a lack of will to even engage with truth in the first place. It's a willful blindness, and it thrives in exactly the kind of world we've built today. Bonhoeffer saw it in 1943, but you're seeing it right now on your screen in your workplace, in every institution that rewards conformity over thought, volume over value, performance over principle. And the scariest part? Most people still don't recognize it for what it is. They think it's just politics, just trends, just the way things are now. But Bonhoeffer knew better. He knew that once stupidity becomes organized, it becomes unstoppable. And once people lose the ability, or the courage now to think for themselves, truth dies quietly, and the lie takes its place, wearing a smile, holding a flag, screaming into a microphone. So no, this wasn't just a theory from a man in prison. It was a warning from someone who tried to stop the collapse of sanity and paid for it with his life. The world ignored him once. The question is, will we ignore him again? Stupidity. It sounds like an insult, a cheap shot, a word people throw around when they run out of arguments. But that's not how Bonhoeffer meant it. He wasn't calling people dumb, he wasn't mocking them. What he saw was something far more serious and far more dangerous. Because to Bonhoeffer, stupidity wasn't about IQ. It wasn't about lack of knowledge or even ignorance. It wasn't something people were born with. It was something they became. And that distinction matters. Bonhoeffer believed stupidity was a kind of spiritual surrender, a choice people make, consciously or not, to hand over their ability to think. Not because they're evil, not because they're uneducated, but because it's easier. It's easier to follow the group. It's easier to repeat what you're told. It's easier to feel smart than to be smart, because actual thinking is hard, it's uncomfortable, it's lonely. It requires self-doubt, uncertainty, effort, and humility. But stupidity? Stupidity feels good. It feels powerful. It feels loud. It gives people the illusion of being right, without ever having to ask themselves if they are. And once that switch flips, once someone gives up the responsibility of thinking for themselves, they don't just become wrong, they become unreachable. That's why Bonhoeffer called stupidity more dangerous than evil. Because evil still recognizes truth, it just chooses to oppose it. Stupidity, on the other hand, becomes completely disconnected from truth. It doesn't fight it. It just ignores it. Or worse, it mocks it. Think about how this looks today. You present facts. You explain your point clearly. You give examples, sources, nuance. You do everything right. And what do you get in return? A meme, a smug comment, a talking point, a quote taken out of context. A room full of people clapping for someone who clearly didn't understand the question. You're not debating anymore. You're yelling into a void. That's what Bonhoeffer saw. He saw stupidity as a social phenomenon, something that spreads, grows, and becomes encouraged in certain conditions. Conditions like mass propaganda, fear, blind nationalism, political conformity, social pressure, the need to belong at all costs. Sound familiar? Bonhoeffer wrote that once people surrender their mental independence, they become part of a machine, a system that no longer needs their brain, only their obedience. They become tools, not evil, not curious, not skeptical, just tools. And once a society reaches that point, where enough people have chosen stupidity over thought, the whole thing becomes unstoppable. Because stupidity protects itself. It doesn't allow questions. It shuts down criticism. It cancels dissent. It punishes nuance. It demands submission. And worse, it turns its followers into defenders of the lie. Bonhoeffer described it like this. Upon closer observation, it becomes clear that every strong upsurge of power in the public sphere draws in an increasing number of stupid people. Let that sink in. The more power someone holds, the more stupidity they attract. Why? Because powerful people don't want truth. They want loyalty. They want simplicity. They want masses who will cheer, obey, and never ask, why? And the truly stupid, the ones who've turned off their inner voice, will always do that. Not because they're evil, but because they genuinely believe they're right. They don't question what they've been told. They become it. They fuse with the system. They identify with it. They defend it, even when it's clearly killing them. It's not a glitch, it's the design. So no, Bonhoeffer wasn't just warning us about dumb people. He was warning us about a specific type of moral collapse that happens when people stop taking responsibility for their own minds. He was warning us about the temptation to stop thinking. And look around, that temptation is everywhere. It's in the algorithm. It's in the political party. It's in the trend. It's in the tribe. It's in the voice that whispers, just go along, don't ask, don't think, just agree, be safe. And the moment you listen to that voice, the moment you choose comfort over clarity, that's when it starts. That's when the slide begins. And if too many people make that same choice, you don't just lose truth, you lose civilization. Bonhoeffer warned us about stupidity becoming a moral failure, but he also said something darker. Power always thinks it has a great soul. That's what happens when stupidity becomes a strategy, not just a mistake. Because here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Dumb voices win because they're easier to follow, they're louder, they're simpler, they're shameless. And most of all, they give people permission to stay lazy, angry, and ignorant. Think about it. A dumb voice doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't challenge your beliefs. It doesn't tell you to sit alone in silence and wrestle with hard truths. No, it tells you, you're right, they're the problem. You're smart just for being here. And that voice becomes addictive. It gives people what they want. Rage, simplicity, identity, all without ever asking them to think. Meanwhile, thoughtful voices, they speak softly, they pause, they ask questions instead of shouting answers. And in today's world, that means they get drowned out. Because we don't reward wisdom anymore. We reward volume, we reward certainty. We reward performative outrage that turns complexity into clickbait. You want proof? Scroll your feed. Who's getting millions of views? Who's trending? Who's getting interviews, sponsorships, airtime? Not the people asking nuanced questions, not the people trying to understand. It's the ones screaming, "I know what's wrong with the world, and it's them." And every time that content spreads, the algorithm learns. It learns to reward anger, to boost tribalism, to ignore critical thought. It feeds us what Bonhoeffer feared most, the illusion of intelligence without the effort. And it gets worse. Because eventually those dumb voices stop being just personalities. They become leaders. They get voted in, they get power. And when that happens, stupidity isn't just a glitch in the system anymore. It becomes the system. Bonhoeffer saw this happen in Nazi Germany. He watched as smart, educated citizens, doctors, professors, priests, handed over their minds to a mass movement that gave them certainty, pride, and identity. They weren't all monsters, but once the stupidity took root, once they chose the comfort of not thinking over the pain of responsibility, they let monsters lead them. Fast forward 80 years, we now live in a world where anyone with a camera, a ring light, and a loud opinion can gain a following bigger than whole universities. That's not inherently bad. Some of those voices are brilliant. But the truth? Most aren't. Because the system doesn't reward truth. It rewards attention. And truth and real truth doesn't always get clicks. But stupidity? Stupidity gets clicks, shares, applause, and money. And here's the part that should scare you. Once stupidity becomes profitable, there's no incentive to stop it. You think media companies care if their talking heads are right or thoughtful or honest? No. They care about watch time. They care about engagement. They care about rage. Because rage sells. And stupidity, it's just rage dressed up as confidence. So now we're left in a world where the dumbest voices are the loudest, the most manipulative rise fastest, the reasonable ones are invisible, and the people who do think clearly feel completely alone. And if you're one of those people, if you feel like you're constantly surrounded by noise, tribalism, fake certainty, and shallow thought, then you need to hear this. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're just awake. But if we want to stay awake, if we want to push back against this wave of socially accepted stupidity, we can't do it silently. We have to support each other. We have to find each other. So if you haven't subscribed yet, if you're still just watching from the shadows, ask yourself, why stay quiet in a world that only rewards the loud? Tap subscribe. Not because I asked, but because you know what we're building here is different. And if you still don't want to, then go ahead. Scroll down to the comments right now and explain why. Explain why you'd rather sit in silence while the dumbest voices take over. So ask yourself again, if truth is this weak in the algorithm, what happens when stupidity becomes a belief system? Bonhoeffer already gave us the answer. He saw it clearly, even from a prison cell. You can't argue with stupidity, not because it's dumb, but because it's closed. It's locked itself inside a system of slogans, reactions, and pre-recorded scripts. You say, but here's the data. They say fake news. You say that didn't actually happen. They say, well, I heard it did. You give them facts, they give you memes. And no matter what you say, no matter how gentle, rational, or respectful you are, nothing gets through. Not because they can't understand, but because they've decided they don't need to. They've subcontracted their thinking to someone else. They've outsourced reality to whatever group, channel, or echo chamber makes them feel seen. And when that happens, Bonhoeffer says, it's over. Against stupidity, we have no defense. Let that sit for a second. He didn't say against evil. He didn't say against propaganda. He said stupidity. Because when someone gives up their ability to think, they also give up their ability to change. They become a passenger, a mouthpiece, a vessel for whatever narrative they've glued themselves to. You've seen this before. You've felt it. That moment in an argument when you realize this person isn't listening. They're just waiting for me to stop talking, so they can press play on the script they memorized. It's like talking to an NPC in a video game. You can say whatever you want, but they're gonna give you the same 3 lines every time forever. Bonhoeffer called this the most dangerous form of submission, because unlike tyranny, stupidity doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't bark orders. It doesn't need a gun. All it needs is an audience that's too numb to think for themselves. And that's exactly what we've become. A culture of reaction. A population that confuses confidence with truth. People who think having a strong opinion means you've done deep thinking. We scroll, we react, we repeat. And every now and then we feel a flicker of unease, a quiet voice in the back of our mind that says, wait, am I just repeating someone else's opinion right now? But that moment, that flicker, it's terrifying. So we smother it. We drown it in more content, more comments, more sides to pick, more dopamine. Because stupidity is safe. It's familiar. It doesn't ask anything from us, except obedience. That's the difference Bonhoeffer saw between evil and stupidity. Evil at least knows what it's doing. You can reason with evil. You can confront it. You can challenge it with evidence, morality, truth. But with stupidity, there's no handle to grab, no logic to engage with, no framework to challenge, no curiosity to work with. Just a wall. A blank, smiling wall of opinions that were installed like a virus and now repeat on command. And the worst part? They believe they're thinking for themselves. That's what makes it so dangerous. They think they're awake, when really they've just swapped one program for another, and in that state, truth becomes useless, even dangerous. Because the moment you speak the truth, they don't hear you. They hear the enemy. They hear whatever their favorite commentator said to expect. They hear a threat, a disruption, and their brain slams the door shut. That's what Bonhoeffer meant. That's why he sounded so hopeless. Because when stupidity takes hold, you can't pull someone out of it. They have to want out, and most don't. Because wanting out means confronting the idea that you've been living in a lie. That the things you said, the fights you picked, the ideas you spread, weren't yours, they were just noise. So people stay inside the cage, not because it's locked, but because it's comfortable. And that's what makes this moment in history so insane. We are surrounded by cages that people have built around themselves, then painted to look like windows. So when you speak the truth, it doesn't sound like a gift, it sounds like a threat. Because truth requires change, and change is the one thing stupidity will never allow. So now what? If Bonhoeffer was right, and we're living in a world where stupidity is more dangerous than evil, then what the hell are we supposed to do? That's the part no one wants to face, because the first truth is, you can't fix stupidity in other people. You can't argue them out of it. You can't explain your way through it. You can't sit down and debate respectfully and expect the fog to clear, because the fog isn't an accident. It's the point. The slogans, the emotional reactions, the mental shortcuts. That's what makes stupidity so addictive. It's easier than thinking. And once someone's tasted that kind of simplicity, they'll protect it like it's their religion. So no, you can't save them, but you can protect your own mind. You can stay sharp when the rest of the world is going soft. You can stay silent when the crowd is screaming. And you can stay aware when everyone else is chasing the dopamine of outrage. That's what Bonhoeffer would have wanted us to do. Not become martyrs, not become saints, but become sovereign, mentally independent. Clear. He wasn't just warning us about them. He was warning us about the risk of becoming one of them. Because stupidity isn't just something that happens to other people. It creeps in on everyone. It starts when you stop checking your sources. It grows when you stop asking hard questions. And it wins when you get so tired, so overwhelmed, so fed up, that you just start repeating what your side says and stop thinking for yourself. So here's what you can do. 1. Stay autonomous. Be suspicious of any idea that feels too good to be questioned. When a take gives you that instant shot of, yeah, I'm right, while it pass, ask yourself, is this my thought or just one I borrowed? 2. Stay quiet until it matters. You don't need to jump into every argument. You don't need to clap back on every stupid take. Let them talk, let them posture. Let them ride the waves of groupthink. You stay still. Because in a room full of noise, the one person who waits to speak will always be the one worth hearing. 3. Stay humble enough to learn. Just because you're not stupid now doesn't mean you're immune. Stupidity doesn't show up with a warning sign. It shows up dressed as certainty. It whispers things like, of course I'm right. It disguises itself as confidence, so stay humble. Keep your mind open just wide enough to let real thinking happen. Not to let propaganda in, but to keep yourself from hardening into someone else's script. That's how you survive this, not by yelling louder, not by being smarter on Twitter, but by becoming the kind of person who can't be captured. Not by stupidity, not by algorithms, not by fear, Because the truth is, we're not just living in an age of noise. We're living in an age where silence has become a weapon. You want to know who the most dangerous people are today? Not the ones with millions of followers, not the ones ranting into a mic, not the ones with perfect political arguments. It's the quiet ones, the ones who are watching, the ones who are listening, the ones who refuse to get pulled into the stupid games. Because those people, they're not asleep, they're preparing. They're the only ones who will still be thinking clearly when the system finally eats itself. And if you're still here, still watching, and still listening, then you're probably one of them. So I'll say this as clearly as I can. So if you're still one of the few who thinks for yourself, don't vanish, subscribe. Don't let the internet convince you that your clarity doesn't matter. Don't let this video end and just disappear into the next one, because you are the resistance. And yeah, I said it, we're not fighting some cartoon villain. We're fighting stupidity, which means the battlefield is your attention. And if you won't subscribe, then at least drop a comment below and tell the rest of us why. Why is silence your choice? And because let's be honest, if you saw everything we've just shown you and walked away unchanged, then either you already knew this or you're already gone. Bonhoeffer didn't write all this as some random philosopher taking notes from the sidelines. He wrote it while watching a society go insane in real time. He watched normal people become monsters, watched teachers repeat Nazi slogans, watched intellectuals bow their heads and say nothing, watched a nation fall in love with noise and forget how to think. So when he said stupidity is more dangerous than evil, he wasn't being poetic. He was telling us what he saw. He was telling us what we're seeing again, right now, in real time. Because this isn't new, it's not 2020's madness. It's not a TikTok trend. It's not kids these days, or boomers, or the government, or the elites. It's human nature. It's the pattern that repeats every time a civilization loses its grip on truth. It starts as distraction, then it becomes confusion, then it becomes obedience, then, finally, it becomes applause. And in the end, stupidity doesn't just destroy truth, it drowns it in applause. So now the only question is, will you clap? Or will you watch? Will you drift into the noise? Or stay quiet long enough to hear the signal?